So we are about to start panel 3 dedicated to content and creativity with our first talk from Simon Ganahl on campus medium, or what is a digital monograph. Simon Ganahl researches and teaches at the University of Vienna as a literature and media scholar with a focus on digital humanities. He directs the digital mapping project Campus Medius. It's a peer-reviewed open access journal published by the Open Library of Humanities, Genealogy of Critique. After studies in Vienna, Hamburg, and Zurich, he obtained his PhD degrees both in communication science and in German philology at the University of Vienna. He was a visiting researcher in the School of Media Studies at the New School in New York and a visiting lecturer in the Center for Digital Humanities and UCLA. His research work has received several awards and grants, for instance, apart from the Austrian Academy of Science and Jordingen, not sure if I have pronounced this correctly, from the Austrian Science Fund. Simon, the floor is yours.
That's perfect. So thank you very much, Paula, for the introduction. I have 15 minutes if I remember right, so I will have to talk fast. I'm actually part of the OLH community, not in my role in Campus Medius, the project that I will present to you today, but rather as the managing editor of the journal Genealogy and Critique, which has been published by the OLH since 2017. It was formerly entitled The Foucauldian Vie. It is pretty much about post-structuralism, about Foucault, science and technology studies, the stuff most of you, I guess, know from your own studies. Today, I would like to talk about Campus Medius, which was intended in the start as a kind of digital monograph. So it's actually more related to another project that also Martin Eve, I think, has initiated. It's called COPIM, and it has to do with scholarly-led infrastructures of monograph, open access monograph publishing. So I thought you might benefit from this kind of side view. You're talking about open access journal publishing, especially about Janeway. I will show you one project at the University of Vienna, led by myself, where I tried to do a kind of digital monograph and also ask the question, what is a digital monograph? So the whole thing started actually in my PhD studies. One of the texts as a literary scholar where on which I worked intensively is called Dritte Walpurgisnacht, Third Walpurgis Night, by a Viennese writer called Karl Kraus. Karl Kraus was one of the main figures of what is called Viennese modernism. So this time around 1900 in Vienna. Kraus was a journalist, a writer, a satirist, a dramatist. He published his own journal, which was called Die Fackel, the Torch, which was mainly about media criticism. He's a very well-known media critic. And in 1933, Kraus, right after Hitler was appointed Reich Chancellor in Germany at the end of January 1933, he started to write a documentary essay which grew over 300 pages, called Third Walpurgis Night, Dritte Walpurgisnacht. He did not publish it while he was living for a lot of reasons. I won't go into detail here. But what is important for Campus Medius about the Third Walpurgis Night is that for Kraus, as a contemporary living in Vienna and watching what was happening in 1933 in Germany, the weekend of May 13 and 14, 1933 was very important. It was a kind of turning point of how he judged, how he saw the contemporary political situation. And that's why I started to research about this weekend. And with this idea in mind to do something about the weekend, I went as a postdoc to the New School in New York, to the chair of Shannon Matton, a media scholar who was then working at the School of Media Studies at the New School. And together with her and with Rory Solomon, a programmer and media artist, I developed and published the first version of Campus Medius, which went online in summer 2014, and which is the so-called topography module of the whole thing. As you see here in the topography of Campus Medius, we combine an interactive map with a timeline, and this timeline actually shows not the whole weekend of May 13 and 14, 1933 in Vienna, but rather 24 hours. The 24 hours come firstly from the historical events themselves. Important stuff begins on Saturday afternoon at 2 p.m. and ends on Sunday at 2 p.m., so around 24 hours. But there was also a literary concept that I'm sure most of you know that inspired me to start a historical case study from these 24 hours in the city. And that is the concept of the chronotope by Mikhail Bakhtin, in English, time space, chronos, topos in Greek, yeah. So the idea, what Mikhail Bakhtin, a Russian literary scholar who wrote this essay on the chronotope in the 1930s, based on his analysis of literary works from the Renaissance to from antiquity to Renaissance, and the idea was to analyze the unities of time and space in literary works. As I was mainly working on the modernist period in the first third of the 20th century, I right away had works in mind like Ulysses by James Joyce, Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf, Petersburg by André Bely, a symbolist novel by the literary novelist André Bely, or to name another medium, the well-known documentary Berlin, The Symphony of a Great City by Walter Ruttmann. In all these artworks from the modernist period, you have the attempt again and again to capture modernity by displaying, by imparting the events within one day or within 24 hours in a big city, in a metropolis. And I thought, why not use this concept for a historical, for a cultural media historical study. So much about the timeline. On the top here, you see a map. This is a city map of Vienna from 1933, which I found in the Austrian National Library. I scanned it high-res. We converted it into a GeoTIFF file, and we rectified it to align with the underlying data of the so-called digital base map. In our case, that's the OpenStreetMap, which you see here in the background. And it's called, the technique is called rectification. And what you do is you transfer a historical printed map into a digital map, actually. So if you click on Start here, on the topography, you jump to the chronologically first event within the topography within these 24 hours. I will quickly go through the events here and stop by the main event of the weekend. It happened on Sunday morning in the Palace Gardens of Schönbrunn. Schönbrunn is still the most important sightseeing spot in Vienna. It was the summer residence of the Habsburg family. Austria was a monarchy until the end of the First World War, ruled by the Habsburg family, and Schönbrunn was, as I said, their summer residence. On this Sunday morning, May 14, 1933, it was used by a right-wing group in Austria, the Austrian Home Guards, to stage a huge mass rally, which they called in German Türkenbefreiungsfeier, Turks Deliverance Celebration, translated into English. And it commemorated the liberation of Vienna from the Second Turkish Siege in 1683, which was 250 years before 1933. But it was actually a kind of kick-off event for what was later called Austro-fascism. In the second module of Campus Medius, we use this event, this mass rally, this propagandistic mass rally, for a multi-perspectival account analysis. What does multi-perspectivity mean here? In the background are theoretical concepts like the dispositif by Michel Foucault or the actor network in the sense of science and technology studies, meaning that I wanted to develop a multi-perspectival description of this event where the perspectives are not only human actors but also non-human elements. The perspective should not only be discursive but also material. So you have human actors here, human perspectives like the leader figure Ernst Rüdiger Starrenberg, who organized the whole thing, but you also have the residence itself, this French garden, this Baroque garden built in the 17th and 18th century, which was used to stage the event. You have the camera by Fox Movietone News, which captured the whole event. You have a huge radio network put into place to broadcast the speeches live and also to broadcast it with a public address system into this huge garden. And so you have very diverse perspectives. All in all, there are 15 perspectives. And we grouped them into 3 different, we call it mediations, but they are actually different mapping interfaces. And from a topological view, different types of networks. So the first 5 perspectives are grouped into the bird's eye perspective on what was happening, and the background, also the coded background structure, both in the back end and in the front end of the website, is a centralized network. The second group, mediation interface, is a panoramic interface, meaning that the user moves from one perspective to the other in a panoramatic mode, and it is a ranked network in its topology. And the third group is the street view, so meaning the user navigates from one perspective to the other in the street view, and the network that we put in place for this is a distributed network where all the mediators or all the perspectives are connected with each other. I do not have the time to show you examples, but you can just pull out your phone or your desktop computer in front of you, go to campusmedius.net and just see for yourself how the navigation works. I just would like to say one thing about the icons here. They are based on Isotype. I don't know if you heard about that. Isotype is a very well-known design language developed from the mid-1920s in Vienna by Otto Neurath, and we used Isotype, which is a contemporary design language to the historical case study for visualizing these different perspectives on this Turk's deliverance celebration. In the last minutes that I have in this short presentation, I would like to tell you a little bit about the infrastructure of Campus Medius. As I said, my idea was from the beginning to implement this historical case study as a digital monograph. So I went to the Vienna University Library and talked for many times with them how we could set this whole thing in place, and we ended up using a virtual machine, a virtual server provided by the Vienna University Computer Center. All the media of Campus Medius, which we integrated over JavaScript into the running text, is archived in the digital repository of the Vienna University Library, which is called Phaedra. And we use the Phaedra API to display all these media files, images, audios, videos on the website. So the archiving system is also the API system displaying all the media on the website. We do not store these media files on our own server. Campus Medius was developed from scratch using open source software, the back end in Django using a PostgreSQL database, the front end in Angular and Mapbox GLGS, and we published the complete code of Campus Medius on GitHub. You find it linked here in the overview under the MIT license, and it's already used by different universities. For example, right now we have a cooperation with the UC Davis Data Lab, which uses the code of Campus Medius, which is freely available, open source, for a historical mapping project. Of course, the complete content of Campus Medius is available open access under the Creative Commons license CC BY. This would be something that I would like to talk with you about, meaning I had to struggle, really had to struggle, and talked a lot with lawyers and experts from law about the question how the right of fair use, which is called in German Zitatrecht, so meaning as a scholar, I'm allowed to cite other stuff without asking the creators for permission, how this applies to digital projects. So how I am allowed to cite not only texts, but also video parts, audio parts, images as part of this digital monograph. So I still ended up in a kind of law gray area, and it was really hard to figure this whole stuff out. I'm already at the end of my time, but the last thing that I would just like to mention is that at the end of the whole project, when everything was online, I also did a book edition about it to kind of archive it. So this relates actually very much to what Martin said in the keynote before. One of the main ideas why I did an open access book in the end, and open access means it was still printed and an ebook. It's available in German and in English under the CC BY license. One of the main reasons why I did the book is to archive the whole project, because it's very easy to archive data and it's very, very hard to archive front end. So stuff like Campus Medius, where the front end is very important, where the navigation modes are very important, where all of this has meaning. Every icon, every navigation mode that we decided is filled with theory, with meaning. It is very hard to archive this digitally, so I decided to archive it as a book. Okay, thank you very much. My 15 minutes are gone. Thanks for your attention, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Simon.
Right, well, thank you very much. First off, for inviting me to deliver this talk today. I'm here kind of representing the journal Open Screens. Open Screens is the chief editor is Andy Moore. I'm one of the editorial board members as well. And this paper, I should mention, it's been kind of written in kind of collaboration between me and Andy. So we've had a few discussions over the summer about open screens, the challenges and the opportunities, as the talk is titled. But before I kind of talk more about Open Screens, the journal itself, we just kind of thought it would be nice to provide a bit of an overview of the landscape of open access publishing in film and screen studies. And some of the remarks are kind of a bit, sweeping statements, generalizations, and are based kind of on anecdotal kind of evidence that me and Andy have kind of gathered. So Open Screens is a film and screen studies open access journal. It's aligned to the association BAFS, so the British Association of Film, Television and Screen Studies. Hugely significant achievement of BAFS in collaboration with OLH to have established Open Screens. And there are many other open access publications in film and screen studies, okay, and I had a quick look on Directory of Open Access Journals, which lists at least 283 journals under the subject of media, so media rather than film and screen studies. But the most prominent journals in film and screen studies remain those that are behind paywalls, so the likes of Screen, the Journal of British Cinema and Television, Historical Journal of Film, Radio and Television. And whilst colleagues who have institutional backing can potentially publish articles open access in these journals, many of the articles remain locked. And of course, there are many colleagues who do not have permanent academic affiliation to any one university, which obviously presents barriers for them in terms of open access. And monographs and edited collections remain a key form of publication for research in film and screen studies. But again, I'm sure we're all kind of aware of this, the majority of those kinds of books are often prohibitively expensive, particularly edited collections, ranging from kind of £100 to £200 or more at times. And yet the kind of number of edited collections I see being put together by colleagues, by myself even, okay, it's considerable regardless of this cost. Now, arguably, I do think, and again, this is anecdotal, that perhaps there is a lack of research or kind of critical reflection within film and screen studies specifically about open access publishing. And at a recent conference, for example, when I raised this point, I was shut down. I was basically told that open access has been solved, just publish gold open access via the university, and that's it. And I think that kind of response is indicative maybe of an attitude that merely frames open access as a bureaucratic exercise rather than as an opportunity to develop a transparent and open research culture. So that's kind of the context of thinking about Open Screens, the journal. And a few immediate questions do kind of come to mind that I've listed there on the PowerPoint, okay? Some of these I will try and answer, some I probably won't, and no doubt other questions will come up along the way. So how does Open Screens operate as a journal? What are its editorial policies? Is there space for further development, user experiences of the Janeway system? How does it stand out for a growing open access crowd? What of its relationship to BAFS? And I think that's kind of going to be the main question that I'll examine over the next 10 minutes or so. And how can it be a key competitor of those top paywall journals that I showed you a minute ago? Can it be, and should it even attempt to be? So quite a few questions there that I've listed, and as I say, I won't answer all of them. And I'll no doubt raise a few of the questions along the way. Now, I want to begin with a little bit of the history of Open Screens and its origins, and it's a history that some of you will no doubt be familiar with, and indeed be a part of that history as well. But to tell you about the origins of Open Screens, I just very briefly have to tell you a little bit about BAFS, okay, so the professional association with which the journal is affiliated. So BAFS was founded in 2011 as a means of providing national kind of representation for film, TV and screen studies. And given the kind of fragmented nature of the field, often, it's spread across university departments with researchers, often being very kind of interdisciplinary by nature, it was felt that BAFS was the right kind of body for such a diverse and open field. Now, the aim was to increase the visibility of the field and to lobby on behalf of members. And from its inception, BAFS has given kind of consideration to a potential journal. But in its earliest years, it was felt that BAFS was still too young, still too kind of finding its feet, and therefore setting up a journal was far too risky. Alternatives were considered, and there was a proposal in October 2011 to publish a newsletter, to establish deals with existing journals, or even kind of find, established discounts on subscription to existing journals as well. Now, between 2012 and 2015, attention was primarily given to growing BAFS as an association, establishing an online presence, increasing membership, establishing an annual conference, composing responses to kind of rapid changes in the HE sector. There was a loose relationship initiated with the Open Access Journal Frames as well, which is a postgraduate run journal at the University of St Andrews. And as BAFS grew and its annual conference became a really kind of established feature of the field, it's a really thriving conference now that takes place every April. Publishers approached it to inquire about setting up a dedicated journal, including Intellect, in 2015. However, it was the late Professor Brian Winston, and for those of you that aren't aware of Brian, he was a towering figure in the field of film and media studies and instrumental in the founding of BAFS and Open Screens. He held really strong views about the kind of the stranglehold, if you will, that academic publishing that had on intellectual research. And he was defiantly against simply signing BAFS up to a traditional subscription model journal. Now, it was January 2015, BAFS gave full consideration to establishing an association sponsored and edited and peer-reviewed journal. And the proposal was led by Brian, and the proposal was for an open access publishing model. And a meeting was arranged between Martin Eve, OLH, to discuss options and seek advice. Now, publication with OLH was seen as kind of the most kind of cost-effective option, really, rather than kind of going it alone. Now, on the slide here, I've got what was the original proposal, bullet points from the original proposal that was put together in the summer of 2015. for a journal that was already by that point called Open Screens. I'm not going to go through all of these in detail, and hopefully you can see them and the text isn't too small there, okay? Now, OLH accepted the proposal for the Open Screens Journal in 2017, and then the Executive Committee of BAFS was appointed as the editorial committee, and Andrew Moore was the Chief General Editor. And the BAFS constitution was also amended to stipulate that the Chief General Editor, so Andy, had a duty to report to the BAFS Executive Committee, and he has to submit an annual report, and that is still the case. Andy will, kind of late spring, early summer, put together a draft report. He sends it to us as the editorial board. We kind of add our contributions. It goes to the BAFS Executive Committee, and they provide a bit of feedback as well. Now, I don't want to get too bogged down in the history of the journal, but I've included these bullet points on the PowerPoint slide just because these principles laid out in the original proposal, I think, remain at the heart of the journal today and at the heart of editorial meetings and email discussions that we do have. Debates about word counts, reviewing processes, submission processes, kind of themes, having an open house style. And it's these principles that I'd suggest were about and are about democratizing the publication process and remain, as I say, at the heart of the journal and how it is operated to be interdisciplinary, innovative, international and open. Now, it's that word open, however, that perhaps does pose challenges at times, okay, that openness. It's again a conversation that I've had anecdotally with colleagues, particularly at the BAFS conference, who aren't always entirely sure what Open Screens is about or who it's for. Okay, so what is the journal about? Who is it for? What is its focus? Now, on the PowerPoint there, I've got the scope of the journal as it's set out on the journal website. And just to kind of highlight a couple of the sentences in there. So the first sentence, the scope of the journal is international and its vision is interdisciplinary. It encourages innovative contributions from scholars of film, television and other screen-based media. Open Screens ranges over the historical and the contemporary, and it aims to embrace film, television, screen and media studies, as well as screen-based research in related disciplines across the humanities and beyond, such as area studies, gender studies and sexuality studies. So it's really kind of all-encompassing in the kinds of material that it will accept. Now, there's been 6 volumes of Open Screens today, with around 64 pieces of work thereabouts published, articles, reviews, practice research, commentaries. And the content reflects the focus and scope that I've just outlined on the previous PowerPoint slide. Now, the first issue included work by senior established researchers, ECRs, PhD students, and the topics range from kind of film technology, textual analysis to French opera films and contemporary Hollywood blockbusters. I think the first issue really did reflect the kind of varied approaches, research and methods from across the field, apart from one key aspect, which was practice research. Now, it's from from volume 4 onwards that Open Screens has published the work of creative practitioners. And creative practitioners, or the creation of audiovisual essays, is central to the work of many film and media studies colleagues. And the audiovisual material is embedded alongside research statements in the journal, or longer commentaries as well. And it's this incorporation of the creative practice work that makes the journal really unique in the field, with few other journals able to offer this option. Indeed, by offering this option, it brings together more theoretical, historical work with practice-based work as well, truly meeting that kind of objective to be interdisciplinary in scope. And other journals indeed hold university structures, typically separate the theorists, the historians and the practitioners. Open Screens brings them together. I think that goes back to that question then. So who is Open Screens for? What is its focus? Well, it's for the field primarily. Field that is far too often, as I say, kind of separated, fragmented and forced apart. Instead, Open Screens allows those fragments, wherever they may be situated, to come together in an open and flexible space. And in doing so, I think it reveals a kind of the widespread diversity of research in the field and its natural interdisciplinarity. Now, I'm aware that I've only got a couple of minutes or so left, so I just wanted to end with a few points that Andy and me kind of came up with as well through our discussions. Okay, kind of points that we think are perhaps, you know, for wider potential discussion, and reflect that kind of title about the opportunities and challenges for open access publishing in film and screen studies. Now, the first point is about giving equal and shared space to written critical work and film practice. So the point that I was just making there about creative practice work. And the video essay really does look kind of set to expand as a format for film research. It's got the potential to reach wider audiences beyond kind of academic audiences, and it's work that might potentially even get kind of screened at film festivals as well. We have seen this with, for example, the Bristol Rediscovered Festival in 2023, programming at least 3 such examples of creative practice work. So it's got, as I said, kind of potential as a journal to reach a non-academic audience. The open access online format and its wider audiences. Okay, so the film and media studies academic work is potentially of interest to wider communities beyond academia. We have initially tried to consider more kind of conversation pieces, but to run alongside the kind of critical work as well. But often the standard was a bit low, the submissions were few in number. However, we are thinking about potentially introducing editorials or even giving space for interviews as well. Challenges encountered by open screens, and perhaps it's not unique to this journal or to open access publishing, but it's soliciting peer reviews and getting reviews back in a timely fashion. That is perhaps the most frustrating aspects of the process for us, and particularly the fact that we often have to have double, blind peer reviews as standard test for publishable quality. And we're kind of hoping that in a way that going forward, can open access publishing challenge that kind of standard test for publishable quality. The other kind of challenges are the fact that at times with the Janeway system, we might not have used it for a while. Okay, so many weeks or months, and when I come back to it, not entirely, sure how to use the system again. So having to kind of rely on each other's knowledge, perhaps email each other to remind ourselves how to use a system. So not always feeling confident in using the journal management system at times. And then the final point, it goes back to the idea that the research culture within film and screen studies perhaps still has a long way to go in terms of open access publishing. And so we're thinking of ways, for example, through the connection with BAFS, to how we can strengthen that so we can really embed the journal within the community. So, for example, at the next conference, BAFS is going to pay for 2 of the editors to attend the BAFS conference. We're going to set up a stall and really promote the journal to colleagues that are there as well. And that, it could even be a potential for inviting OLH to attend the conference as well. We've also wanted to take a lot of social media work on Twitter, but now Twitter seems to be down ever since it's transformed into X. So that's become an even trickier business as well. So I'm aware that 15 minutes is up. I'll end at that point. It's just a brief overview of Open Screens, its history, some of the opportunities and some of the challenges that we've faced as well. And I hope that was useful. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jane. It was really good to hear about the journal Open Screens. Now we are going to go with our third speaker, and then we are going to have hopefully 5-10 minutes for some questions from the audience. Our next speaker is Souvik Mukkerjee. I'm very sorry about my pronunciation. This is embarrassing. He's going to be talking about taking on the Ludic empires, an open library of humanities intervention in video games studies and colonialism. He's actually also a guest editor in one of our special collections on post-colonial studies in game studies. And I remember organizing with him a webinar at the start of the pandemic, like 3 years ago, about the special collection. I will share a link to the video to our YouTube channel soon after my presentation on to the Discord channel. And Souvik Mukkerjee is an assistant professor in cultural studies at the Center for Studies in Social Sciences in Calcutta, India. Souvik research looks at video games as a storytelling media through a broad spectrum of topics in game studies such as post-colonialism, identity in video games, and video game cultures in the global south. Now, Souvik, all to you. I hope you are feeling well, because I know that you have been sick with COVID. In fact, we weren't sure if we were going to participate. We are very glad to have you here, and we are hoping that you are okay. You are not feeling that sick anymore.
Thank you so much. Am I audible at all? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. I thank you so much for making the time, all of you, and I will apologize in advance because I have a really bad cough and just kind of said slightly under the weather still. So I wanted to thank OLH for this opportunity and for taking on the Ludic empire, as I say. So I am a researcher in video game studies, which is a fairly new area, but again, new and not so new because it's been around for 20 years now, just over 20 years. And kind of, I want to start by saying that, there is this kind of major trend in board games and video games culture of colonialism being taken as a default. And here you have a monopoly game which is about the colonization of Africa. Uh, as you can see, I mean, it's kind of like open season, as it were. The fate and fortune cards define kind of how Africa is going to be colonized by European powers. Similarly, kind of a few decades later, you have kind of games like Age of Empires, Empire Total War, Europa Universalis. You can see even from their names that these are very colonial kind of games with a colonial idea, kind of colonizing nations, settler colonialism, so on. In video games, there is also a tendency to kind of orientalize, kind of to use Edward Said's concept to kind of portray places, non-European places, often as Oriental. And you see, for example, how Indians are portrayed. And one of the, I mean, there are many slides that I have, but I'm just going to show you one. This is a character called Hallam in the Street Fighter series of games. And his name, and you can see he's kind of wearing a loincloth, and he can breathe fire, and he's wearing this necklace of skulls. And his name actually literally derives from lentils and beans, which is the best that the developers could do. They just walked into an Indian restaurant, looked at the menu. Literally, they did that. They crossed the road, looked at the menu, and they saw this, and they gave him this name. And they were even more imaginative about his wife. His wife is called Sari. She's wearing a sari, and they just call her Sari. So from there, again, kind of other games like Lara Croft, Tomb Raider, Uncharted, which are Indiana Jones type exploration games, where the white protagonist just kind of goes into an exotic location, often India, and kind of explores different things, finds treasures, and comes out. It's about getting resources, treasures, and And then there are also games that are about slavery, and I'm not going to go into the complications of this particular game, Assassin's Creed Freedom Cry, but and then again, kind of there are portrayals which are quite offensive to, for example, I mean, people from countries like India, like this one, for example, which is in Civilization, where Gandhi, who, as you know, is kind of known for his kind of politics of nonviolence and civil disobedience. He is kind of shown as being famous for one thing, which is dropping nuclear bombs. And apparently there was a there was a bug in the game where basically if somebody had a kind of a violence rating of -1, it just shot up to the maximum, like 100 or something. So Gandhi has a very low violence rating, and if some people made him so non-violent that it went to -1, then he became super violent and he started dropping nuclear bombs. But that's apparently not the case. People have later admitted that it was a joke. It was an Easter egg of sorts, and that it was just like funny to have Gandhi dropping atom bombs. But then I kind of like see a parallel of kind of seeing Gandhi as a threat, somebody as a nonviolent person as Gandhi as a threat to global politics in games, as they're portrayed in game civilization games, as a parallel to what Winston Churchill kind of said about Gandhi, looking at him as alarming and nauseating to see him a seditious Middle Temple lawyer striding half naked up the steps of the viceregal palace while he's still organizing and conducting a defiant campaign of civil disobedience to parley on equal terms with the majesty of the king emperor, sorry, with the representative of the king emperor. So kind of, again, kind of, I think this is kind of, there is on the one hand, there is this kind of default understanding of settler colonialism as the norm of quality and diplomacy in video games. There is the other norm of looking at kind of games and portrayals of kind of characters in games as very orientalistic. And again, kind of there is, in that same portrayal, there is also this other kind of sense of seeing the threat in the colonized as well. All of these kind of come out in video games. And I also see colonialist logic as being hard-coded into game algorithms in the way games present history. There is, of course, kind of notions, or there are, of course, notions of counterplay and counterfactuality. My colleague, my co-editor on this Open Library of Humanities special issue, Emil Lundedal-Hammar, about whom I'll say a little more, has also already worked on counterfactuality. And there's also an importance of pointing out subaltern representations in games, like representations of history from below, representations of history which is kind of silenced, and that is something I've done some work on in 2018, following the work of subaltern historians from India and elsewhere in the global south. But why I kind of call this talk "Taking on the Ludic Empire" is because for a decade there was a debate between people who said games are just games, they follow rules, and others who said video games tell stories, and this was called a ludology narratology debate. And often there was actually an accusation that departments like literature departments were colonizing video games, and saying that they were telling stories. But there was no actual discussion, no actual acknowledgement of the fact that these games themselves were actually about colonialism and about kind of empire and unabashed kind of sort of upholding of empire and colonialism. So there was also very little representation of persons of color, scholars from the global south, really in game studies. I mean, you would see very little representation. And also there was a lack of inclusivity and diversity in game studies discussions per se. Also, seminal studies of the industry in the global south happened later, much later, from 2013 and onwards, really. And there were already articles on post-colonialism and empire, but these were all on paywall journals. And I was thinking of my Indian students who would never be able to read my book or kind of any article that I wrote in journals because they wouldn't have access, really. And in India, for example, there's a thing called InflibNet, which the government has, and it gives you access to some journals, but they cherry picks you have to have different levels of access or grades or that kind of thing. So most people don't get access to journals, and journals are accessed through piracy. I'm not going to name the website, which is the most common for this, really. And sometimes there's actually a Facebook group called Ask for PDFs for those who don't have access on Facebook, and you kind of write to them, and if they can get you the article, they get you the article. So this was what the scenario was, and even is at the moment, sadly. So video game journals have remained largely out of reach for global south scholars, particularly those who are students, and particularly those who don't have positions in very reputed universities. So one premier journal, Game Studies, was open access, but even Game Studies had not published articles on colonialism and post-colonialism, barring one exception, when we kind of decided to bring out this special issue. This was the reason for bringing out the special issue. Emil Lundedal-Hammar, who was at the time doing his PhD, and myself, I had kind of just returned to India from the UK, and I realized that there was this massive problem that it was not possible to take game studies scholarship to Indian students. And I happened to meet Caroline Edwards, who was very kind I think it was a chance meeting in the BL, and she was very kind to agree to my proposal that we have this open access journal, and she suggested that we could do this special issue, and we kind of went forward with it. And of course, I'm kind of very, very grateful to the OLH team, to Caroline, to Rose Harris-Bertil, and others who have assisted us throughout, and also to our reviewers, really, who whom we have kind of mentioned in our acknowledgement. But if you look at our kind of special issue, what we say is that the treatment of colonialism is marked by a Western and very late 19th century imperialist bias. So in the past 2 decades of research, we kind of have kind of pretty much missed out on critiques of imperialism and neocolonialism. And when they have been made, they're also not accessible in regions like the global south, and many of the countries which were formerly colonized, really. And there is very little scholarship to respond to these kind of debates, these arguments. So it was the aim of this special issue, and it is, I think, the first and the only special issue of this kind in game studies, if I'm not mistaken, to address post-colonialism and empire particularly. And it was kind of this to address this epistemic omission and counter the bias where it exists, also by bridging video games research with larger discussions of post-colonialism in other humanities contexts and disciplines. And I need to say this because even post-colonialist thinkers have often just kind of let video game studies or by the wayside pretty much. They haven't really noticed or kind of given enough attention, really, because it's probably not I don't know. I think there's a colonial mindset working in this post-colonial kind of research because they've kind of looked at these as games or kind of silly games or that kind of thing. And there's been very little kind of engagement with, from mainstream post-colonial scholars. And this is the objective of the special issue, to bring it into larger humanities context and kind of make this kind of really clear. That there are kind of, this is a medium which has kind of been addressing key issues in colonialism, post-colonialism, and yeah, so kind of sort of encouraging this. And we've had many, as you can see, views, many citations, and had really positive responses from the contributors, because the articles actually came out as they were edited and sent to us and then edited, and the editorial process was fantastic. And I think you've just been told about this webinar, this talk that we had during the pandemic, where we talk at length about kind of our experience with the journal with Rose Harris Birtle, and you can listen to it as well. It's on YouTube, open access. So this was particularly fantastic for us to have this special issue, which then gave open access kind of, which provided open access articles to range of scholars particularly from the global south, really. So, and the articles then here actually cover everything, perspective from epistemological power, theory and practice in critical academia, to context of production and practices of play, to close readings of post-colonial traces in video games, and also in board games, because one of the major articles in board game studies, post-colonial board game studies, actually started off in this, in the special issue that Emil and I co-edited. And then, of course, Emil and I moved on to co-edit a different special issue, but then, okay, so this is actually my favorite T-shirt, which I haven't worn today, but I usually wear it at all the conferences. But this is from the American game Oregon Trail, and 1971 game, which was used to teach many people. It was used in pedagogical exercises. And the iconic ending was, "You have died of cholera," which has been parodied by the post-colonial game scholar Elizabeth Laponzi. So I will end by saying that I also, in this understanding of the journal, as it kind of happened, and as we thought through it. And I'm sorry, my brain is really flu-addled at the moment, but I'll try my best to, sort of rationalize why we did this. I think in theoretical terms, it actually kind of is very close to what Walter Mignolo talks about as decoloniality. And he says that the D indicates above all the need and the goal of the re-epistemic constitutions of re-emergence, resurgence, that is neither new nor post. So it's not anything new, really, and it's kind of a break from the colonialist logic, whether it is in the algorithm of the games, or whether it is in the algorithm of the thinking about the games and the criticizing of, the critical analysis or kind of critical presentation of the games, and of course of the system of kind of this paywalled kind of presentation of ideas, really. So as which is of course kind of very restrictive in terms of access, and kind of quite well, there is bias obviously depending on which geographical location you're from and what servers you can access. So this is again in a sense, for us, for me at least, I mean, Emil can, of course, tell you yourself, you're right. But I'm sorry you couldn't be here. But for me, it is more of a delinking, really. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Souvik. That was really interesting. I think we now have 10 minutes for questions. Do we have any questions from the audience? I'm gonna check the online audience as well. We have a question from Caroline.
Oh, whoops. Thank you so much. Those were 3 really brilliant overviews of the incredible work that the editors associated with OLH are doing. I was going to start with a question for Simon, actually. And I wanted just to pick up on the point about how you decided to publish a book to archive that project. Given that we're talking about digital preservation, and all the different ways that open data might be stored robustly for the future, could you say a bit more about other options you might have chosen other than the book, than the bound codex form?
Thanks, Caroline. Yeah, I mean, I struggled a lot with this question. I mean, first of all, there is a very pragmatic reason why I ended up doing a book version of Campus Medius. There is something in the German-speaking academic world which you do not have to do, luckily, and this is called, habilitation. You know what I mean, Caroline? Habilitation. It is a kind of a second book, a postdoctoral project, but it's more formally than in the Anglo-American world. It is like a precondition to apply for full professorships. And the academia still requires that this is a book, a traditional book. You are just not allowed, not at the University of Vienna, and also I do not know of any other university, although there are in all the universities, they have digital humanities program at play, but you still need to submit the PhD and also the habilitation, so the postdoctoral thesis, so to say, in the form of a traditional book. So this was a very pragmatic reason, but the other thing was that I learned also with my work at the OLH as the managing editor of Genealogy and Critique, and also with Campus Medius. I mean, I get what Martin Eve was saying in the keynote, that still a lot of publishers don't even do the pretty simple archiving of data, like, for example, PDFs or images or HTML, text or things like that. But this is not very difficult. We have repositories at all the university libraries. It's, for example, I mentioned Phaedra at the Vienna University Library, a really good, a very solid digital repository. It's very easy there to archive in the long-term data. But it's really, really hard to archive front end. And in Campus Medius, these mapping interfaces, the mode of navigation, I just did not have the time to show you this, but if you take the phone or the desktop computer for a few minutes, try it out. It's very heavy on zooming and panning and tracking. It's just not possible right now, at least not what I could find out, to find a long-term archiving solution for something like that. Because if the technology, you have in the stack, in the programming stack, you have you have 2 interfaces that are problematic. One interface is the hardware interface. The hardware could change in a way that would not support anymore the virtual machine where Campus Medius is running. And you have these browser interfaces. The browsers could change in a way that would need a new funding, a new grant to develop Campus Medius in a way that it would still work in a totally new way of browser technology. And we are running the thing and we still have a little bit funding left. So I think for the next 5 or even 10 years, it will be fine. But after that, I don't know what happens with the website. And that's why I decided to do the book.
We have a question as well from Discord from Jason Coleman. The question is for James. In the light of Martin's keynote, I'm wondering what OpenScreen is doing on the digital preservation front, particularly with embed media in your articles. I see they are on Vimeo, who I'm worried about because they have recently gone through a round of layoffs and have negative operating income. And rights are often given by authors from downloading the Vimeo files for archiving. Do you know whether these files are actually being archived? How do you advocate for media archiving to authors who just want to do the easiest thing possible and move on? We are wrestling with this same problem at Michigan with our journals.
I wouldn't know. That was a very long question. I wouldn't know if, when it gets into kind of technical stuff there, what Martin said about most academics have no idea about archiving policy. I'm one of them. I have not a clue. That is my answer, unfortunately.
Yeah, to be honest, we are facing similar issues with other journals that we have. For instance, the Journal of Embodied Research. We publish videos with them. And yeah, I think hopefully in the future, we will be able to have better services for preserving videos in the same way we are able to preserve the publication of articles. And then we also have a question from Joseph. Okay, the mic, who has the mic?
Hi, this is Joe Muller from the OLH. I'm a developer. I posted my question in Discord, but also just read it out. So it was about this metaphor of maps and typography, which are providing a real rich world pattern, inspiring the user journey through the digital edition of Campus Medius. It's a great example of a match between the system and the real world, which is a usability heuristic. How far do you think this goes when you're structuring user interfaces for digital publications? Do you think it works especially well because the content is topographical in this case? Do you think it works especially well for books as opposed to articles or issues or other kinds of collections?
Yeah, to be honest, thanks by the way for a really great question. I think in mapping there are, in an idealized way, there are the 3 ways of standardized perspective and navigating. This is bird's eye and zooming. This is panorama panning, and this is street view and tracking. And one of the points of Campus Medius was to show that these different interfaces are actually world views. They come very naturalized to us, but they have their histories. Looking on the world from above means looking from what Donna Haraway called the God trick. It's the God's perspective. And historically, it's, in the European history, it's a monarch as the guy who mediates between God and the people looking on his territory. And the same is true for the panorama, which emerged in the 19th century, and the street view, which is a 20th century thing. So you can very much track their history in a historical way. And it is, this is something that Lev Manowitz showed very clearly with his theory of new media, that our modes of navigation in digital media have, and this might interest also James Fenwick, or I guess he knows what I'm talking about, these modes of navigation in the digital media have a screen background. It's about zooming modes, it's about panning modes, it's tracking, camera tracking if you're in the street view. So to come back to your question, this is, I think that's applicable to very many different digital contexts. It doesn't have to be cartography, it doesn't have to be a project about a city. these are, I would say, in an idealized, in an ideal typical way, the main perspectives and modes of navigation in digital media.
Thank you.
I think it's 12 now, so I think we are ready to go for lunch. Thank you so much, Simon, James, and Souvik. Okay, thank you so much. Bye-bye.